Hello, this is Rashi Sahai, and you're watching Medicircle. Today, on our Children's Health Awareness series, we have Dr. Diptanshu Das with us. Dr. Diptanshu Das is a pediatric neurologist and neurodevelopment specialist, and he is the co-founder of Institute of Neurodevelopment, and he has an overall experience of 17 years. Welcome to Medicircle, Dr. Diptanshu Das.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So there has been 178% rise in the prevalence of autism in the past 20 years. In India, every 1 out of 100 children below the age of 10 has autism. So nearly in 8 has at least one neurodevelopment condition. So doctor, can you please tell us what are the first signs of autism in a child?
So the first sign of autism can be the lack of eye contact in a child. Normally what happens is as the child develops, the child has a social development, the communication of the child improves. Now in autism, there's a problem with the communication and the social development of the child. It is also associated with behavioral problems. So it could be that the child is doing certain behaviors which is not expected for age. The child could be biting, the child could be throwing tantrums. It could be the child is actually isolated and not intermingling properly. The speech development is usually lacking, and what happens is the child could also show regression. Regression means that the child was initially developing the speech well, then suddenly the development stopped, and thereafter the child stopped communicating. So this is often seen in a child with autism. And overall, what happens is in various other stages of development. For example, there's a form of development which is the sensory aspect. Normally, we take in the senses and we assemble them. So when I'm talking to you, there's a video stream, that is the visual stream, and there's a audio stream which you are combining automatically. And without that, if you were just listening to a audio stream, it would have been a lot difficult. But if it's two or more senses together, it becomes a lot easier. In case of a child with autism, this assembly of senses is difficult, and often they have sensory difficulties. In that case, what happens is these children cannot really interact with the world the way they want, and they cannot express themselves. They find it difficult. These children are often going around very rapidly. They have repetitive movements, and they can have sounds which are called echolalia when they're repeating the same words again and again without definite coherence. So it could be that the child is uttering gibberish and talking on his own rather than following commands. So when you call the child by name and when you give the child specific instruction, it could be the child is not listening. And when you ask the child to do something, maybe the child does not like it. And when you try to change the situation, the child throws tantrums. So overall, these are the signs that you could see early in autism. And if you can detect these early, if you have the suspicion that might be that things are not proper, it's very important that you visit a doctor who can address such a situation.
Okay, doctor. So how does an autism affect the brain?
Now, in case of a child with autism, there are certain areas of the brain that are involved, but more importantly, what happens is the neural connections are a bit haywire. Normally, what happens is we learn by forming connections between the neurons. So as there are more information that come in, the brain forms newer and newer connections between the neurons. Now, when these connections are not very relevant, so when the brain cannot actually do synaptic pruning of the information that is supposed to be connected, and a lot more information rather than what needs to be connected is there. So basically there's information overload. Rather than processing say a few things at a time. Suppose your computer now handles tens of thousands of information at the same time. What will happen? Your computer will get hanged. And in that process, you'll actually not be able to give the output that you need to. In case of a child with autism, the brain has connections that are not that relevant, and the brain cannot get rid of these connections. So ultimately, the output of the child suffers. So it's not really a lack of connections, it's excessive connection that the brain has, and the brain cannot make out which are the relevant ones.
Okay, Dr. So, can you tell the audience, like, can autism be cured and treated?
A lot of people think that autism cannot be cured, but I'll give you a different stand on the matter. Just understand, autism is a neurodevelopmental problem. Now, what is a neurodevelopmental problem? There's a neurological component and there's a developmental component. In case of a child, what happens is there's a certain amount of development that is supposed to be expected. So, in case of a child, first there's physical development, which occurs in the form that the child is able to sit, stand, walk, things like that. This fine motor development, so the child can hold things like a pen, buttoning a shirt, combing the hair, and things like that. So these come into fine motor development. And there are other aspects of development like emotional development, cognitive development, or the intelligence overall. And there's social development, there's emotional development. In case of a child with autism, more or less, most of these parameters suffer, though it's primarily about social communication. This deficit in most of these domains. So, if we actually aid the development in these parameters, although the underlying neurobiology is not going to change, will definitely see improvement. Now, when we talk about the underlying neurobiology, just understand learning is something that the brain develops correlation about. So, the more you can correlate, the better is the learning, and that way the brain actually changes. So it's not that the brain actually does not change. In fact, if you act early, the brain actually has the dynamicity and can change. So I'll say that the brain can really outgrow autism. Now, when I say outgrow autism, this is not as easy as it seems. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to lay down a long-term course. First, we'll have to do a functional assessment of the child. Functional means what are the things the child can do and cannot do. Based on that, if we lay down a long-term plan that these are the long-term goals, and you segregate them, that by breaking down the long-term goal into short-term goals, once again, the short-term goals that are there, you break it into actionable items. Now you work effectively with the child on each of the parameters. You devise specific plans where you work on these, and gradually you'll be seeing improvement. So, in case of a child with autism, the child can gradually develop on each of the parameters the child is deficient on. It's only a matter of time that the child can outgrow autism. Whether the child can really do that is a matter of how intensive you work with the child and how early you start. So, when you lose initial time, there's much that you cannot achieve because the early brain has a lot of neuroplasticity. Now, once you start late, you get a very less amount of time, and even intensive therapy, even though it can give you improvement, will not be adequate to set the child on main tracks. So, overall, the child can really outgrow autism, but in real practical life, this needs a lot of hard work and a lot of correct guidance, which is unfortunately not available in many places. Furthermore, for the sensory issues, usually you need to do occupational therapy and sensory integration, and that way it can take care of the sensory issues. Regarding the speech therapy that is done at many places, actually it's not much helpful because unless you work on the prerequisites of speech, just working on the speech component is not going to help. The initial thing that I explained is about the ABA approach, or applied behavior analysis approach, that I explained. In fact, in special education, which is practiced in many places, there's a lot of similarities, but ABA has a more structured approach. So, with respect to a child, if these therapies are done systematically, you will see improvement. Medicines can be given, but those are just supportive. Those are not the primary thing. And yes, treatment is possible. I'll not say cure is possible. I'll not say cure is impossible.
Okay. So, can a child having autism be brought back to mainstream?
The answer is yes, and definitely yes. As I have explained in the previous question, that improvement in a child with autism is possible. Now, there's a concept of inclusive education that has been promoted over the last few years. In case of inclusive education, we have to understand the system should be robust enough to accommodate these children. But before that, if you try to mainstream, it's going to be a disaster. Suppose the child does not have enough skills to go to a school. In a school, suppose there are 40 students, so it's not possible for a individual teacher to attend to so many of the students individually. In that case, what happens is you will not be able to take care of it right away. So you need to prepare the child for this first, and only then you can send the child to school. Furthermore, the teachers there should be equipped to handle such children. And if you can actually do the therapies that I mentioned, you could actually develop the skills, and the child could have enough skills that the child goes to mainstream and absolutely develops the independence that is needed. Right away, it's not possible, but with proper interventions, it's definitely possible.
Okay, doctor. So, through Medicircle, our main focus have always been to provide the audience with much information in less time. And so, today we will be conducting a small question answer session in which you can either answer in yes or no, or a one or two line sentence will also do. So, my first question is like, do autistic children have an intellectual disability and can't speak?
Autism can be associated with intellectual disability, but most often that is not the case. Often, children with autism are more bright and can have a above normal intelligence. In fact, they can excel at certain things that other people can't. But sometimes we do see the intellect to be less. We'll say that is an association and not the norm.
Okay. So, do autistic children have a learning disability in them?
Once again, I've explained that children with autism have a number of issues, and that could affect their learning. But learning disability in itself is a different issue altogether. I'll say learning disability is not directly associated, but yes, children with autism have problems in learning. At the same time, if we can ease them out, this is really going to go away.
Okay, doctor. Thank you so much for coming to our show and sharing your valuable time and insights with us at Medicircle. It has been a pleasure having you on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.